What if I told you that Ferrari has been building his car on a technical illusion all this time? What a secret document from Hamilton changed everything in Monza. During a good part of the first half of the 2025 season, a silent shadow began to grow inside Ferrari. It was not an obvious problem as an error in the pit stop or a motor brake. It was more subtle, more complex, and therefore much more dangerous. Lewis Hamilton, newcomer to Maranello, noticed from his first kilometers with the SF25 that there was something fundamentally bad in the car. It was not simply a matter of tuning or adaptation. It was a problem of root concept, which conditioned all the behavior of the car on the track. Far from limiting emails with vague suggestions, Hamilton decided to get involved at an unpublished level. Not only did it spend hours at the factory, but also actively sought technical meetings with the most important names within the Ferrari structure. John Elkann, president of the group, Benedetto Vigna, CEO of Ferrari, and Frédéric Vasseur, head of the team. These meetings, which initially looked like courtesy talks, soon became strategic sessions where Hamilton presented their findings with evidence, graphics, telemetry correlations, and test proposals. What made these documents unique was his approach. They were not conventional pilot reports. They were almost case studies, where practical track experiences were integrated with technical foundations acquired for more than a decade of competition at the highest level. They touched critical aspects of the car, such as longitudinal stability and combined braking, the sensitivity of the rear to the fuel balance, or even the realistic operating range of the tires under thermal load in long batches. Some inside Ferrari did not know how to react. They were facing a pilot who not only behaved as an engineer, but also questioned without arrogance, but with forcefulness decisions that the team had validated for months. However, there was a key detail that began to worry internally. Many of the anomalies that Hamilton described, without having full access to all technical data at that time, began to coincide with isolated observations that engineers had failed to connect. Instead of just saying that the car was unstable, Hamilton explained in what moments it was, under what circumstances the erratic behavior was worse, and what were the collateral effects that this generated in the long batches, the career strategy, and the management of tires. It was, in essence, building a general theory of SF25, a car that seemed competitive only when certain specific conditions were given, but that outside that range was technically and operationally decomposed. There were still weeks for Monza, but already then, the true value of those documents began to be outlined as a warning that Ferrari could not continue to ignore. And when the Italian Grand Prix finally arrived, everything Hamilton had written took a different dimension. They were no longer just ideas. They were fulfilled predictions. The Italy Grand Prix, held at the Monza Autodrome, unexpectedly became the perfect scenario for an unprecedented technical hoax within Ferrari. It was not a premeditated deception, but a mirage. Throughout the weekend, the runway results seemed to indicate that SF25 finally had taken a step forward. The car was stable, predictable, and for the first time in the season, both pilots were able to complete their sessions without reporting serious erratic behaviors. Charles Leclerc finished fourth, Lewis Hamilton sixth, and the Italian press, thirsty for a positive narrative, soon talking about a structural recovery. But what really happened was much more disturbing. Lewis Hamilton, with his technical sensitivity already fully refined after months behind the wheel of the Ferrari, did not be fooled by appearances. From the first day of activity on the track, he noticed something strange. The SF25 was not paying better. Simply, their defects were hidden. The layout of Monza, with its predominance of long lines, strong braking, and low side load curves, had created an ideal condition to hide the chronic symptoms of the car. The circuit design worked as a kind of analgesic for the structural problems of the car, offering an artificial sensation of performance that was not held under normal conditions. That discovery was devastating because it meant that Ferrari had not solved any of his problems. I had only temporarily camouflaged them. The load sensors, the pressure maps in the tires, and the registers of wear in the rear axis showed out of the usual behaviors, not because the car was optimized, but because it had simply not been required in the areas where it normally collapsed. Internal, this finding caused an uncomfortable reaction. The technicians who for weeks had affirmed that the simulations predicted an improvement for Monza, now they had to accept that what they were seeing was not progress, but a circumstantial effect. The entire team faced a painful truth. The SF25 was a car that literally depended on the type of circuit to look competitive. It was not adaptable. It was not reliable. It was a car that could only work when external conditions mitigated their internal defects. And while the fans celebrated a false hope of redemption, within the Ferrari paddock began to settle a deeper concern. If Monza was a mirage, How many more races would have to pass until Ferrari returned to the harsh reality of aerodynamic instability, balance errors and unforeseen load losses? Lewis Hamilton, meanwhile, understood that Monza was not a step forward. It was a red alert disguised as progress. The circus had masked the problem, but he had already lifted the curtain. And behind her, there were no solutions. Only an entire structure that needed to be rewritten from scratch. On Sunday night, after the end of the Monza Grand Prix, one of the most intense engineering sessions occurred for Ferrari in years. While the paddock began to dismantle and most of the teams were preparing to move to the next calendar event, a small group within Maranello remained in a state of shock. Not because of the result on the track, but for the unquestionable revelation of the data. All the documents that Lewis Hamilton had been preparing during the season, all the notes that many in the factory had seen with skepticism or condescension, now aligned with a disturbing clarity with the telemetry recorded in Monza. It was a brutal, almost humiliating validation, because it confirmed that the true diagnosis of the SF-25 had not arrived from the wind tunnels or the test benches, but from the pilot's seat that was just a few months in the team. Each of the points indicated by Hamilton in its reports was reflected in the data. The longitudinal instability of the rear axle under progressive loads, the imbalance of the suspension when certain compression speeds were reached, the extreme dependence of a very narrow vertical load range to avoid the aerodynamic rebound. Even the thermal maps of the tires revealed what he had predicted. The car worn out irregularly when it did not circulate in ideal conditions of environmental temperature and pressure. It was not an intuition. It was science. What most impacted the technical department was the precision with which Hamilton had described phenomena that are normally detected by advanced sensors or complex CFD analysis. He had spoken, for example, a support vacuum that he felt when leaving medium speed curves and progressive acceleration. In the data, that void appeared as a momentary loss of aerodynamic pressure at the bottom of the chassis, just at the moments he had indicated. These types of coincidences are not accidental. They require an almost perfect sensory understanding of the dynamic behavior of the car. And that, beyond talent, requires experience, track time, and above all, a deep connection with the technical language of the team. But this validation did not bring with it a feeling of triumph. On the contrary, he left Ferrari facing a difficult truth to digest. They had had the information in front of them for weeks, perhaps months, and they had not taken advantage of it. What Hamilton had delivered was not a criticism, it was a map. A detailed map of each structural error of the car, a kind of failure manual that had been underestimated by the internal hierarchy. Ferrari's technical pride, based on decades of history and innovation, was eclipsed by the intervention of a pilot who had not even completed a season with them. Monza was not only the scene of a technical revelation, but the epicenter of an identity earthquake that shook the pillars on which Ferrari has built its legend for more than 7 decades. The Scuderia, a symbol of Italian car pride, is not accustomed to its structural defects coming to light so crudely, and even less when the author of the diagnosis is a newcomer. Lewis Hamilton did not simply identify errors. He presented a complete operation system that had ceased to be efficient, which had been outdated in the face of the demand for contemporary Formula One. Hamilton's statements after Monza were measured, but the message was clear. There was no resentment but an implicit urgency. Ferrari needed to change. Not just the car, not only the strategy, but his way of thinking. The Scuderia could not continue clinging to a structure where innovation depended more on internal intuition than on multidisciplinary collaboration. This chapter does not close with a race. On the contrary, it opens a series of questions that not only affect Ferrari's future, but the balance of power throughout the grille. Can a team rebuild from within when its foundations are committed? Or will Ferrari need to reconfigure completely, adopting a new way of thinking, developing, competing? Hamilton has done its part. He has even fulfilled the role for which he was hired. But the real challenge is not yours. It is from Ferrari. The question that is floating in the air after Monza is as direct as it is implacable. Are they prepared to listen, to change, to give up their pride if that is what is needed to win again? And now I invite you to reflect. Do you think Ferrari will really make the necessary decisions to correct the course? Or we are witnessing another chapter of resignation made up as progress? Do you trust that the voice of a pilot can redirect the future of an entire team? Leave it to the comments.